Okay, our last panel for today is on inspiration, collaboration, and process. And I just wanted to speak briefly about collaboration because that's a theme that we've heard throughout today. Just two quick quotes from previous participants. Rebecca Napolitano said in the second panel, you know, really the questions that we're asking should not be answered alone. Janet Eckelman said, you know, collaboration is not a serial process where you do something and then I do something after that. Collaboration is when you don't know how it's going to turn out because you're working together on something completely new. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to a group of folks who have all collaborated together on a project that they'll talk about with the moderator, Mark DeChiazza.
Hi, everyone. Yesterday at the Lewis Center, I experienced this thrilling performance of a music dance work. It was called There Might Be Others. I hope some of you got to see it too. There Might Be Other on stage presents as and is a really powerful piece of art. It's 10 musicians and 13 dancers who become a living decision-making system that determines the course of the action on the stage. The performance of this work will be different in every single iteration. Every time it's performed, it will unfold in a unique and completely different sequence and form. I'm Mark DeChiazza. I'm a director, designer, choreographer, filmmaker, something. I did not work on this project. I just am a huge fan of it and all of these amazing people who collaborated on it. And I'm also really excited by the kinds of possibilities that it suggests for all of us. In this panel, we're going to explore inspiration, collaboration, and process through a discussion of this really multi-dimensional work that you can look at from a whole bunch of different angles, and sort of any way that you look at it, you're going to see something different. It poses a lot of questions with its unconventional mix of collaborators and unconventional form. It's really interesting to me because the project is an endeavor whose output comprises both this performance work, theatrical performance work, which one could say is an engineered performance. And it also has an output of scientific research, which you could call, or I might call, they can argue with me if they want, artistic science. I think the thing that's also really special about it, it's not just the output, it's that the input is also, performance and science are also both inputs, so data becomes an input. For example, movements of the dancers can be influenced by data and also generate data that can shape, say, a mathematical formula, which then can shape dance performance. We'll go into this, they'll give you the better version of all this much later, but this is my take and just sort of a perfunctory framing to give you a place to start. We're going to move into a really open kind of discussion because I think given the collaborative nature of this piece, it's best if you get to hear these people talk to each other. So bear with me because in order to really get the most out of that kind of discussion, I think it's important to know who's talking to each other and sort of what their background is. So I'm going to briefly give you a bio for each person. We'll just go down the line, and then they're going to give you a short introduction to what something they feel is important in their role or participation in the project. And then it will get much looser, I promise. So, Rebecca Lazier is a choreographer who directs a project-based group of dancers in New York and is a senior lecturer in dance at Princeton University. She has produced her work in Hartford, Los Angeles, Istanbul, New York, at venues including Dance Space Project, The Kitchen, the Guggenheim Museum, 92nd Street Y, Joyce Soho, and Movement Research at the Judson Church. A film of her piece, Coming Together Attica, was featured in Venice, Italy as part of the Architecture Biennale.
Oh, okay, my role. It's like I thought he was going to do all the bios, and then I was just structurally adaptation. I would say in this project, catalyst might be a better describer than choreographer, and we'll get into the details of that. But I would say bringing people together, both the nexus of the Naomi Dan and then the Naomi through, but then the connections to the dancers. So we'll talk more about that.
Back to me. Do we have a, it's gonna get looser, I promise. Do we have another mic? Or is just one? Might be quicker in this. I'll pass it for now. Alessio Franci received his Master's of Science in Theoretical Physics from the University of Pisa and his PhD in Physics and Control Theory from the University of Paris Sud. He's Associate Professor of Biomathematics at National Autonomous University of Mexico. His research interests span different fields, but the focus is on the regulation principles of biological behaviors and collective decision-making.
Hi. So I arrived in this project probably when the performance was already done, already played. So I had no role at all in the development of the performance. What I did was getting completely fascinated by the data and the results of what I saw, and to start to play with the dynamics that describe this performance. So eventually what I did was to add one parameter, one gamma, in an equation. That was my role in the project.
Cory Craigie is a New York City-based dancer, choreographer, writer, and teacher. She graduated from SUNY Purchase with a BFA in dance and the Dean's Award for Breaking the Mold. She's been a member of Merce Cunningham Repertory Understudy Group, and she has also been a member of Jose Navas' Campagna Flac and Stephen Petronio Company. Cory currently collaborates and performs with artists including Rashawn Mitchell and Silas Reiner, Rebecca Lazier, Javier Cha, and others.
So I'm one of the performers, and there might be others, and I've been a part of this project since its beginnings, which is 2014, and it's gone through many evolutions, and it's been amazing to track that process. And my experience as a dancer, performer in it is I feel like I am an engineer, in that Rebecca is more of an architecture role, and mine is more of an engineering role, in that I make it happen. I build it with myself in time, in real time.
And don't worry, we're going to get to understand fully what it is, but that's coming next. Kaihan Ozemder, sorry, received his PhD and Master's in Science in Mechanical Engineering from Boston University. Kaihan has been a research scholar at the Department of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering and Princeton Neuroscience Institute at Princeton University. His primary research interests are bio-inspired control, animal and human collective behavior, and communication through motion in multi-agent systems. He's currently a senior content developer in engineering at MathWorks, and he is also a dancer and dance instructor in a dance company called Collage Dance in Boston.
Hello. Yeah. So I was scared. So my story to be a part of this project was very different. So I came from Turkey for a mechatronics degree, master's and PhD in the United States, and I did work in collaborative robotics and multi-agent systems in Boston University. And at that time, I started doing the research, and my professor, who's John Biloil, he gave me the freedom to pick a model to understand how robots can communicate through motion and gestures. So it's like a basketball strategy, that we wanted the robots to execute the strategy without talking for stealth problem. And then I said, like, I was at the same time in the United States, and I was like, how can I socialize? And I did salsa workshops. And in the salsa workshop, I realized that the tutor is teaching salsa exactly in that manner. So he says, here's the move, and here's generally what the leader does, and here's what the follower does. And generally, leader uses a signal during the dance to trigger different moves in salsa. So then I said, oh, this is exactly what I'm looking for as a model, because I dance myself and I like dance. And I went back to the professor and I said, I have a model. He goes, what kind of model? I said, salsa. And he says, this is an Air Force project, Kayan. And I was like excited, and I said, maybe it may work. Let me just try to do some presentations. And I did it, and I did PhD out of it with multi-agent robotic systems. And then I started to get involved with Naomi's Flock Logic projects, and I attended the experiment here. Then I had the privilege to come to Princeton to work with Naomi in the collaborative project. That's what I knew before. The project is going to be music, dance, and intersection with engineering. And then I get involved with the project, and hopefully you will hear soon. And it became something that I will never, ever forget this experience in my entire life. And very, very, very happy to be part of this.
Thanks. Naomi Erich Leonard is the Edwin S. Wilsey Professor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering and Director of the Council on Science and Technology at Princeton University. Her recognitions include a MacArthur Fellowship and and she's a membership in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and many others. She works on dynamics and control for multi-agent systems, both technological and natural. She led a multidisciplinary project that culminated in a first-of-its-kind autonomous ocean observing system featuring a coordinated network of underwater robots. With biologists, she studies collective animal behavior and human decision-making.
Thanks. So given my interest in collective behavior and collective dynamics, collective movement, I got involved, I guess, earlier on with Susan Marshall, thinking about what happens when dancers use the roles that we use to model, say, a fish school or a bird flock. And the experience was transformative for me to have the opportunity to think about human bias and artistic choices in the context of decision-making and collective decision-making. So after that project, Dan and I, actually during that project, Dan and I started talking about this idea of social decision-making and the dynamics of a sort of improvisational piece in progress. And we, at some point, met up with Rebecca and realized that we were all kind of thinking about something very similar. And so my role in the project was one of trying to use the tools that I use in my thinking, which involve both observation and experiment, but also the development of mathematical formulations that allow me to explore through mathematics, to understand the relationships between what individuals in a group are doing, how they're interacting, and the rules that we impose, these improvisational rules, and what that leads to. And so the idea was to kind of go back and forth between rehearsals and mathematical abstractions and rules to see how we might influence the piece, how we might come up with ways of shaping the piece. And as it actually turned out, it also informed our mathematics. So we ended up having to go beyond things that were already in the literature, and it's led us in new, beautiful directions in that respect too.
Dan Trueman is a composer, fiddler, and electronic musician. He is a professor of music and director of the Princeton Sound Kitchen at Princeton University, where he teaches counterpoint, electronic music, and composition. Dan's collaborators include So Percussion, the Jack Quartet, singer Irla Leonard, the Princeton Laptop Orchestra, Eighth Blackbird, and many more. He's been recognized by the Guggenheim Foundation, the Barlow Endowment, the Bessies, the Fulbright Commission, and many others.
Okay, so my involvement started about 10 yards from here. I think it was the talk was a CST-hosted talk. I think. What was that? Yeah. Raft Andre, right. It was an amazing talk with the drones who they could have self-organized to solve really cool problems, and all three of us were there. And we went to dinner, but we had a conversation here, and Rebecca started talking to us about a piece she was working on, inspired by a musical piece, Terry Riley's In C, which has certain emergent qualities. It's not fully scored out. It has a vocabulary that the musicians know, and then the piece is sort of, it happens in the moment in certain ways. And Naomi and I had been talking about that very piece, and so Rebecca started talking about it, and I started to laugh, and I think she was a little insulted. She's like, "What? Well, why are you laughing at me?" But actually, I just thought it was really interesting that we were all engaging in the same thing, and we ended up in the same room totally accidentally. And I think you actually asked me to be involved in that moment. You said, "Do you want to do some music for this?" So, so my role in it has been to try to find ways to solve the problem or frame the problem of having musicians in this piece. Rebecca had sort of begun the process, and which was fun for me. I got to respond to her beginning of the process and try to find ways to involve musicians in a way that was going to be in some ways similar to what the dancers do, but in other ways, by necessity, different.
So how many people here actually saw the performance at the Lewis Center last night? So that's cool. Okay, so about half of you. So, I'm going to show 3-minute sort of highlight edited excerpt from a performance of the piece that was done at New York Live Arts a year ago and you'll see some differences because it's a very different kind of setting for the piece, and of course the piece is different every time. So let's look at that. So that's one of the outputs of this project. And then just for the sake of letting you understand another aspect here, wait, let me do actually these. Okay. This is another. These are slides that Kayan was nice enough to loan me. I can't read all of them, but this is, I think we have charts here that already there's something really interesting here because I don't know, I've never seen romper room on a chart before. So there's some very different kind of output coming from this project as well. I think the book is also, this document, which in many ways is almost a plan or a recipe book, is another piece of output that's also very different in form. So I'll bring those slides up again if they're relevant to anything that the group starts talking about. But this is your menu of media to choose from, my panel. So, sure. Do you want to? You had an urge.
I had an instruction too, which was just to start from the beginning for a second, and tell a little bit of the story.
And I'll just ask you all to. To join into the conversation, I think we want to start with how this part, Dan started a little bit about how you very first got started, but then what were you doing? Right. You have, okay. Great.
I can't see. Would you bring up the Riley and see for a second?
I will, yes.
I just want to reference back to my first prompt, and because it's amazing to me to be sitting here with everyone, in part because this started as the simplest of assignments to myself as an artist to get out, to change my process. With each new piece, I want to change my process as well, because to me, fundamentally, it's not about making the same piece over and over. It's really about finding a new way in and see what happens. So I had known about this piece for years. I've taught this piece, but I was reading something, and for some reason, that day it struck me, wow, I want to make a choreographic adaptation of Terry Riley's In C. Not to perform it, just to take that into a studio. So this is it. This is his piece, 53 modules of music, short, long, all sorts. His instructions are repeat each module as many times as you want before moving on to the next. Stay within 3, proceed in order. So I made 10 modules. I went into the studio. I was telling some people this. Cory was in that rehearsal. I was so excited about this. And it was a disaster. I mean, I was laughing because I hated it so much. But I was laughing because of the gift of seeing my habits. I thought I had made 10 different modules. I thought I was being so crafty and wonderful that they would fit together in all these ways. And what it really gave me was a tool to see what I needed, and it was a tool for the dancers to see what could happen. So for the next 2 years, that was 2 years before I ran into Naomi and Dan, I took that as just a simple compositional prompt. We started making more modules, and some of these would just simply come from the need, wow, I feel like we don't have something that does connection. We don't have something that does a spatial tension. We don't have something that from that place of a negative, yet also from asking the dancers, what do you feel like you need? So already in module generation, there became this collaborative process. So it wasn't me dictating all of the material. And as it was expanding, it also took on these modules. I wanted to speak to different genres of dance, different styles, different ways of thinking about a movement as a task, a drop and roll, or some intricate steps. And at the same time, I was trying to make an order, like Riley. But every time I made the order, I would lose the fundamental energy of the negotiation between them. And so it was Cory who suggested one day, can we choose the order? So this was exciting and great and fabulous, except when I didn't like it. So that then was this next stage of, well, what makes something good? Or conversely bad. And then if I told the dancers in these early days of feedback, I'd say, well, that didn't really work, or that didn't work. And then they would try to replicate the thing that I said had worked. And so I realized that my system of giving feedback was completely erroneous and terrible because it was leading them to try to replicate something. So I had to, and we together had to come up with ways of talking about workingness and what were the things that went into something working and what did that mean, what did that feel like before, rather than me trying to define, like when you stood in a circle and she was in the center. So we were in this stage of negotiation. We had about 20 modules. We had just decided to abandon the order. I had no music at the time. I was never interested in using Riley's piece of music, brilliant masterpiece that it is, but that wasn't the thing. I was interested in furthering this role between authorship, in a way, right? So the performers are getting agency here, and here was almost, we're tipping into the place where it's a true co-authorship, that in performance, they're running the show, even though there is this sort of choreographed set. We have 44 modules at this point. So at the fateful meeting over here, I had told Dan what I was doing, and he jumped right on board and then composed music for each module. Now that's an interesting thing, and what do you now do with all of these musicians and all of these dancers? Because we also were looking at how these disciplines are siloed from each other. How often you go to a dance performance and you've got the string quartet or the soloist on the side, and these two forms are trying to do service to each other, but not actually communicating to each other. So we had a wonderful gift of a residency here at Princeton with the So Percussion Summer Institute and Dan's collaboration with So Percussion and Mobius Percussion. And this is when Naomi came and started joining too, and Kehan. And what we realized was that the score, the rules that everyone was following, in some ways need to be the same for everybody, but in other ways, these populations also have to follow their own choreographic compositional sensibilities. So there's one sort of infamous story in our history where we decided to try to teach all the dancers what the music modules were and all the musicians what the dance modules were, so that everyone could proceed in the same order and anyone from the entire population of 25 could introduce the next module, right? Because they're choosing the order as the collective in real time. And everyone would have to pick up on it. Well, this infamous showing was 2 hours long and really fraught. Is that what you said? Yeah, fraught, but also lacked your discipline lacked its own coherency. Our discipline lacked its coherency, and we were missing this place where what could be the structure where both could thrive.
Yeah, and actually, Naomi you were tasked with standing to the side and crossing off the modules as they, or crossing them off and copying them from one board to another.
Writing the order.
So it turned into a bit of a bookkeeping exercise where you were trying to keep track of what happened, and also like if you weren't sure what modules had happened, you'd be looking at the board. Oh, when did that happen? I didn't hear that happen or see that happen. So it was kind of. It felt frustrating in the sense that the focus was on bookkeeping rather than doing and decision making and so on. Yeah.
Could we just to be sure that we're being clear about the sort of the architecture of the piece, it would be nice to like really lay it out very.
Yeah,
clearly.
right now.
Right now, I think about like what are like how the modules work, the way that yeah.
Right. So, so it was right at that. We were right there at that moment where we decided what our rules should be. So,
our rules. Well, we developed different systems of rules with Naomi's aid as well, but nominally, I hope I'm remembering this right, but just that the musicians and the dancers are on their own tracks, and that they're choosing the next module for themselves, and we're choosing the next module for us as the dancers. And then there are ones that where we do intentionally gather as a group.
So I think there's the architecture, the sort of essential, these modules, since you have multiple people making choices on stage together, there have to be rules about how the whole group can move through these individual defined in sections into the next.
So we have this book of 44 modules. Do you want to put the book up? Yeah. Pull the book up. And there's a list, our performer instructions. And so what it is that you repeat each module as many times as you wish within the performer permutations.
Page that you want to go to. I don't think when you full screen it.
So one of the interesting things here in modular development is that developing a module in dance has so many parameters from space and time and dynamics, that what did that mean for us to repeat as many times as they want? How much freedom did they have? And so each rule, each module has not just the content, but the rules of manipulation. So we can do 20, 30-minute improvisations on a single module to find out its life and breadth.
It's weird, my page numbers seem to be different from yours.
Just jump to 45 or something. Do you need a visual? So then, yeah, sure. You want to go for it? Go for it. So this is Whip It.
So Whip It is broadcasted by this physical architecture. My arms are always horizontal, parallel to the floor to start. I have one leg bent, one leg straight. I have shoes on, so you can't really see my foot, but it's there, and I'm pitched forward. And I have a sense of animal alertness that is prescribed.
You guys can do this if you want.
It might feel good to stand up.
I don't know the order.
It's in alphabetical order.
Oh, okay, that helps.
The range of where my forearms are, but not to the point where it starts to resemble a different architecture. But there's just subtle shifts that I can make, but it's still recognizable. It's like a scaffolding of my body is sort of buoyant, but it still maintains the shape. And then the next part of it is the whip. And I return. And I can change sides. So that's like the basic geometry of it. And if you stay here long enough, you start to want to do something different. And so what can I do that's a little bit different, but still within the world? Like this would not be in that world anymore. I've left with it completely. But I can change my speed, or I could make it micro or super large. So, and then when you add a bunch of other bodies in the space, all engaging in this one theme together, and pushing it and pushing it and pushing it and getting bored and then pushing it further and pulling it back again, then you start to realize all this potential that's in this one theme.
And so if you were doing, say, Whip It, there might be other dancers on the stage doing a different module, the one that everyone had been doing or many people had been doing before, for instance.
Right. Right. So after the opening walking score, which is designed to allow everyone to see each other, all populations of music and dance, the first module emerges. And it's truly this talking about emergence and how emergence happens, and we have a language for allowing the contagions of subtleties of movements take on form. And when they decide on that first module, it's sort of, here we go. And the rules are quite basic for each population. Repeat each one as many times as you want. So they might stay in one module for 5 minutes or 1 minute. And it's whenever a performer has the need, and we talk about it as what does the piece need next, they choose the next module. And the only rule limiting there is that you can't lead 2 in a row. So the leadership must be shared. And then as we worked, we slowly start to build in lots more layers to what that little basic tenet is, because it ends up being quite complicated, because what if you don't like the module someone else led? And so then the disagreement becomes a source of tension, and then someone doesn't want to do that, but the rule is you must do every module. And so what we started to learn was actually not just about what's the best module to go next, but how am I with these people making decisions? And which is where Naomi entered, because we really only, I would say, had one way of making these decisions, liking it or not liking it, or moving with 3 modules at a time. And it was these long days with Naomi where she introduced, what if we change the rules to where you only have 2 modules at a time and you must gather to 1 before you could move on?
So just to set it a little bit of context, before going into the project, in the meantime, I came to Princeton, and Naomi and I are having discussions on what kind of collaborative robotics or multi-agent systems we're interested in. We're trying to listen to each other. She asks me, Kayan, what are your interests? And I ask her, and then 2 concepts that we discuss a lot. One is a concept actually just Cory used 5 minutes ago, which is broadcast. So before coming to Princeton,
we learned that word from you.
Oh, thank you. The reason actually, I learned that terminology from a paper. So there was a paper that before coming to Princeton, I was very interested. And the goal was understanding biological muscle cells, I'm sorry, and also bacterial populations. And the problem was this. So they were culturing bacteria, and they were looking at this system as a multi-agent system. And the goal is to control this billion bacteria together to do something in a collaborative sense. But the problem is you don't have access, because there are millions of them, you don't have access to control each individual bacteria. And they were thinking, what would be the ways to broadcast something, a signal, instead of trying to control each individual, but instead broadcast a signal to the whole group, so that maybe we can drive the state of the group from A to B. So and in the Cory's Whippet context, it was Whippet, right? So in the Whippet context, so she goes into the stage and she introduces this module and does the move that is a signal to the group. And some of them are aware of the signal and some of them are not aware, which is, we looked at it, this is exactly one of the problems that we already discussed. And the second thing we were discussing is also, we were also interested in, there's this notion and model called replicator-mutator models in evolutionary biology. So the whole model tries to understand how, if you have a certain size of population, like bacteria, let's say you have 2 different kinds of bacteria, and they have fractions in the population. So what we were understanding, how that populations evolve through time, which population wins, which population retreats, which population has more success. And Naomi did a lot of things in this kind of context in other systems, in different animal biological behavior. And I was also started to understand this kind of behavior, and the tension that Rebecca mentions happens because when the dancers, and Rebecca generally says, I would encourage you to have not more than 3 modules on stage, because if we have 20 dancers and if all of them introduce something, it becomes so hard to see a pattern. That's why we think that Rebecca encourages them for an upper limit. And it's not very constrained, but still, she says, not 3 or 4 is good, because then we said, when you have that constraint, and if there are already 3 modules existing on stage, then the dancers, without talking, have to decide which strategy wins. It's exactly the same thing as which bacteria population wins through time, because the winning strategy will pick up the fraction, and that will lead the dancers to introduce a new module from the possible set. So just to set the context, then we said it's so amazing, that exact same problems that we think in engineering setting that she's trying to figure out in the dance setting.
Oh, great. I was just going to ask if you're working toward talking about, I would love to
I want to add
hear
about the tension.
yeah, and also just to even understand like how you derived data from this and just all the methodology.
So one of the ways that we started looking at it, so Kaihan, those pictures that you showed was literally looking over time. What he's plotting is the fraction of the number of dancers in, say, Whippet versus the fraction of the dancers. So what are they? So it starts with clapping. The black line is clapping, and it becomes very populous. Like 3/4 of the group are doing it, but then like 40 seconds into it, some of them start lying down. So everybody ends up doing clapping, but before everybody's doing clapping, some of them are laying down. That's the red. So the black is clapping, then red. Yeah, so on the, what we're plotting is the fraction at any given moment in time over, I don't know, 5-6 minutes of how they were distributed over these modules. And there's this rule that Rebecca sets that, you should do 3, maybe 4. And what we got really interested in was, in conversations with Cori and the other dancers, was what was the influence of that rule. In particular, the first thing that Kaya and I did in this SOCI rehearsal was to say, no, we're going to make that a tight 3, so that if you want to introduce a new module, somehow you have to get everybody into 2, because you can't introduce a 4th one. And actually what we then did, we did it this gently. The next thing we did, we said, well, what if there's a tight limit of 2? We wanted to heighten the tension and understand from the dancers what that meant for your creative freedom. Because these are things that I learned from Cori and others, which was, if we just say do anything you want, it's not very interesting. But as we impose these constraints and create these tensions, they start, you started to come up with new, you told us that it gave you new, because you're always thinking as you're doing, planning ahead, oh, this gives me a new idea. And so, for instance, I think I even have one of the videos from that rehearsal.
Wait, should I show this?
So one of the things we found particularly interesting when we fixed this only 2, so that everybody had to coalesce into 1. And the first time we did it, some people were a little bit,
The rule of 2?
The rule of 2.
I hated it. I was like, what? How is she going to tell us to only do 2? We've had so much freedom. It just, it felt like handcuffs. But I loved it.
What grew out of it was, so for instance,
this is a good place to start, or
the one where
I think this is the one, right?
Where Rhonda does her thing.
I think it's sort of midway.
Okay,
is this right?
So this is an example where, actually.
Should I go back a little, or can you tell me?
Yeah, that's fine. Let me just give the context. Yep. So, in order to introduce a new module, so all these people want to, the dancers want to introduce new models. They have ideas. They want to juxtapose, and we've said no more than 2. So, if even one person is doing something else, they're stuck, right? So it's kind of, this is why Cori's reaction was like, this is ridiculous. I want to move on. And so what we found were the people who were often leading suddenly lost control, and the people who were resisting and just being provocative suddenly were running the show. And this is a really interesting example.
Should I go?
In which Rhonda, So here they are doing with it. And everybody's getting on board. Now we see some pretty aggressive recruiting to
join us, Rhonda, join us.
And the answer was no. Everybody but Rhonda.
It's okay. It's okay.
So it led
okay,
to,
it's
I mean,
okay.
I remember then later on, and I think I have
The second video?
the second video, which was Cory. I think we did it. This was a video of another run where maybe we had even lifted this rule. So the idea was, can you develop these kind of physical moments that then you recall? Almost to me, it looked like an echo of it when you, Cory. It was like you were physically forcing everybody into another module, and yet it wasn't really necessary, and so it just became a moment. Yeah. Oh, that.
Should I go back?
Go back. Yeah, start right there. That's fine.
There? Okay.
Yeah. So Raja and Tan are doing Bravo. I don't know what Cory was doing at that point. Well, sort of. What I loved about it, it was not a very committed. It was just a. Yeah, and so it was just an echo of this idea of wanting to get them into a module, but you didn't have to. But I thought it was pretty beautiful.
So these studio experiments were observed. They were long. They ran a long time, right? And they were observed by 2 cameras and then charted afterwards. I think I have your notes.
That's the plot you were.
Yeah.
One of the plots you were.
Yeah.
It's in the paper.
Right. It's also.
There. Yeah.
But this is specifically those.
Oh yeah, and there it is.
So let me just.
Right, it's at 300 seconds. Right.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is that event and
And
illustrated.
do you want to talk about the explore exploit?
Sure. So I'll explain the equation part too. So can you come back to my slides if it's possible?
I can, yes.
So one of the first questions Naomi and I were thinking about is that we looked at the performance. It's very interesting, and we wanted to do things with it, and ideas are similar. But first of all, how we can even convert this performance to something we can do like some sort of investigation. So we said, like, how can we even convert this performance to data? Because first I was looking at the videos and I was looking each individual. It was so hard to track each individual and understand their behavior. So we were already interested in the evolution fractions. So we said a very rough, crude way of looking at the data, but very helpful thing would be looking at the fractions instead of by looking at each individual's behavior. We said the easiest thing would be freezing the performance frame by frame, which took me 6 weeks, which was very hard 6 weeks for me. And then looking, and I'll explain why, because I look at each frame and I'm counting how many people are doing which module. And as you see Raja, he sometimes stays like this for a minute. So in each frame, he looks like this, and I forget what he's doing before that. So what he is committed to is so hard to understand. And so I had to go back 1 minute. Oh, he was doing this, still he's in this module. So it took us a while to be able to convert this to be even something on piece of paper. So then we did that, hopefully after 6 months. And in this, actually, as you see on the x-axis, just to give a little bit of context, it is the time of the performance, and on the y-axis is the evolution of fractions. And in the beginning, no dancer is committed to anything, and then some of the dancers with the black one, it starts, and then we look at the evolution in time, and it's symmetric, as because Naomi mentioned, because they have to adapt to one, because they can do at most 2 modules on stage. If one of them is 60%, the other one is 40%, and they evolve symmetrically. So one of the questions that we asked, again, what Rebecca mentioned, is that the tension. So Naomi and I, we already look at animal behavior. So animals have this tension when they do decisions. For instance, a herd of deer, they come together and they decide to stay in a resource area and then use the resources for their own benefit. So then they have to make a decision. They can either exploit what the known resource is, or they can go and explore a new resource. But that's a risky decision for them, because a new resource can be risky. They may have predators there that was dangerous for them. So they have to be very aware of this tension. So a very similar tension we realize happened for the dancers, because dancers are free to choose 2 modules to do out of, let's say, 45. But then if they want to, they can choose only 2 for the rest of the performance. Even yesterday, they were almost allowed, like partially, but Dan would be probably angry if they would do it, but they could pick 3 out of all possible modules and do the same 3 for the 45 minutes. They could do that, but they're not doing that. It's similar to the deer story. They also want to explore things because it's boring for them, and it will be boring for you to explore. So to watch. So they have to balance. And also Naomi and I are interested in what is that balance? How much you need to go in the flow by introducing something new all the time. The other extreme would be they would always introduce something in each second. Come together, introduce. That's other extreme. But it becomes something too not recognizable. So they have to balance how much they need to stay on the 2 modules that they are performing versus coming together and introducing something new, which is actually an explore-exploit phenomena, because the 2 modules or 3 modules on stage that they know, as Cori says, is an opportunity for them to exploit the well-known modules. So she does a whip it, and if she does whip it for 10 seconds, then she says, what kind of variation I can do, and it is still whip it, and it still looks good, but still I stay in the same structure. So if they stay, they can exploit that fact. But then, if they introduce a new module, that means it's risky because that they don't know what is the artistic reflection of that too. So we thought that in the data, we did similar like investigations in terms of how much they explore, how much they exploit. So that's kind of the transition to this well-known explore-exploit behavior. Thank you.
I'd like to talk, I want to be sure that we get to Alessio's introduction into the project and contribution, and the contribution of math and how mathematics were used, because he was brought in specifically to develop a formula, correct?
So that's not completely a true story.
Okay. Well.
So I think that the way in which mathematics appeared and the contribution of mathematics to this project is what Naomi already told at the beginning. So the will of putting structures in such a way that something that's completely free and that's kind of unmodelable becomes something that can be put into a question. So when I arrived in the project, you already had a model that was already published in a conference paper. But so Keihan showed me the video, he showed me the data, and the data and the performance look very oscillatory. So you see a lot of switches. It's very dynamical, not for the movement that the dancers do, also for this, but if you see the data, it's an oscillation. Things goes up and down quite rapidly. So I saw the data, I saw the model that Keihan showed me, and it was just going up and stay there. And I say, Keihan, this doesn't do what the data do. But it was capturing something, but it was not capturing the whole dynamics of the model. So it is really my passion to see data coming from different biological fields, mainly the brain. It's my fields of work, understanding brain dynamics and perception and eventually decision making at the brain level. But yeah, really my passion is to see data and put them in equation and try to capture the kind of universal mechanism, if you can say something like this, that govern the dynamical data that I see. And so we took this model, and I was working on this, on honeybee decision making during these days, so I couldn't spend many time on this paper, but at night at the hotel, I say, let's try something. And then the day back, I went to Kehan office and showed him some simulation that he said, okay, how do you do it? I showed him an equation. It was not still the equation that we published. I mean, not published, but the equation that appears now. But the idea was there. And so, yeah, that's how, I mean, there is no real contribution to the
I just want to be sure, because we're running out of time, so I want to be sure that we get to I think for all of you had your role in this is not your typical role in all of your work. That it was shifted in some way. I think the relinquishment of a certain kind of control is a common theme, and I think that has different implications and carries different baggage depending on what field you work in. So I'm interested in that idea of the loss of control, the giving up of control, and I think that Dan would be great to hear from, because I know we talked about that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think Rebecca and I are surely most used to working everything out ahead of time and having, giving a score to the players or having the dancers, do a choreography that's been well worked out, and then we identify with that. That's our work, and we're proud of it or not so much, depending. And in this case, there was a continual battle with ourselves to not just relinquish that control, but embrace the fact that it was going to be different every time, and it was and embrace the fact that, like, we would have to be surprised and sometimes maybe frightened, as happened last night a couple times, and really feel like it was something that was co-created and co-owned, and that we were. I liked what Cory said about sort of being architects, and then you guys go out there and you do the work. Well, and we watch, chewing our nails. But and although it's interesting, I think over the years of doing it, for the first performances in New York, it was a high-profile set of performances, and we were both terrified. And a lot of the rules were changing in just the few days leading up to it. We were trying to find the optimum setting for the rules so that it felt great for the dancers, but it wasn't like you were saying earlier, like, don't just do anything, right? But since then, I don't have the same fear because there's this community that's been growing, doing this piece that has absorbed this and absorbed some of the lessons from these things. Yeah.
Well, I feel like it's also great to talk about another system that is in play in all of this, which is how the performers are attuning themselves to each other. And this work happens in the performance constantly, and it happens before collectively, and it happens independently for each of us in a different way. And it's really a huge part of the work, and it's has become really apparent and important in how we've worked with other countries, and sometimes working with dancers where we don't all speak English fluently or the same languages, and we have different understandings and misunderstandings of what a word means or what we're all talking about. So how we navigate and negotiate and figure it out and come to a sense of comfort of, actually, I don't really know what is happening right now, but I'm just going to go with it and make it work. And I'm someone who, I like to know what's happening. I like to feel like I know what this is, and I have a grasp on it, and I like feeling in control, but this project has been really great in teaching me that you can't always have the answers, and you still have to be present and make it work. And there's a practice of saying yes to what's happening while it's happening, and a kind of agreement to be agreeable with each other. And
you're all building a viable system together. So it's a very different process than if you're making a piece or a thing. You're actually building a system that can take on its own characteristics, and then you can only tune it, really. What about from the, Naomi, from the perspective of this as research and this kind of research in general, more in general?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly inspiring. I mean, I find that, well, I mean, I guess I'm very lucky. You know, I'm at a place and a point in my career where I can be a student all the time, I feel, and I can think about, you know, I mean, I think about collective dynamics, but to have the opportunity to actually work with dancers, to be given, you know, this generous opportunity to be able to muck around with rules and you know, have people carry it out and take it seriously and have it sometimes get built into a practice is really pretty extraordinary.
But you don't have control the way you do a
was the
normal
question
experiment.
about
Well,
control?
just back to the earlier part, which
Not the question.
It was, I tweaked it a little
all right,
bit,
but
so
I
it's
was
not
just
my
but
bad.
no, but just yeah, I knew it.
Okay, yeah, so it is very different from my normal kind of research where I can decide what I want to do, or you know, my work is very collaborative. I work with postdocs, I work with graduate students, and that's the most fun that I have, and we work together, but it's never so completely out of my control what can happen. But, you know, I think, you know, maybe I'm an eternal optimist, but there's always something to get out of, you know, even if things don't look good in the dance, it could be something that could, and that can actually, so negative results are often really, really interesting. So why doesn't something look good? I mean, what was very interesting to me, it's like, I can't ask my computer model these questions. What kind of...
You can ask Cory.
I cannot, but I can ask Cory,
right.
What kind of, you know, creative or artistic freedom do you get from this? What do you like? What don't you like? I remember one day you invited dancers who were very, you know, accomplished dancers but hadn't learned the rules at all. And I asked you, I think it was you, how it felt. And you said it was just such a relief to know that you would do something and people would actually join you because they didn't have they didn't know, they weren't allowed to leave.
Their own agenda.
Exactly, right. And that was interesting. I mean, these are really interesting things. So, yeah, so it is kind of an incredible experience to work on something and not have that. I mean, it takes you in directions that if I were controlling the whole thing, I might not have gone. And that's the
Probably
whole
all of
beauty
you would say that.
of
yeah.
these collaborations, right? Like we pushed each other in directions we wouldn't have gone. We wouldn't have developed this model that we're now taking in new directions. We wouldn't have, I mean, it's about making, for me at least, making these connections, you know, across these disciplines that if somebody, you know, off the street said, what are you doing, you know? Isn't it obvious to you how connected we are? And they'd say no, but that's the beauty of it, right? And you have to give up control to be able to explore that kind of connection.
So I think we have to end on that note of giving up control because our time is out. Thanks so much, you guys.
Okay, don't leave yet, and none of you have gone for the exit. So we have two more things. We'll allow the panelists to take their seats, and Naomi Leonard will keep talking with our closing remarks, and then, in a good way. And then afterwards, we invite everyone to join us for a reception out in the atrium to continue these wonderful discussions. Naomi.
Okay, so I'm going to close our formal sessions. I mean, what an amazing day. Or I suppose I'm supposed to say, was I amazed by the day? If I'm to put it in a form of questions. But let me absolutely start by doing a few very important thank yous. I mean, first and foremost, I'd like to thank the wonderful and unbelievably creative colleagues I have at the Council on Science and Technology, also known as CST, if you've probably gathered. We absolutely could not have made this symposium happen without the tireless, dedicated efforts of Kathy Galvin, who is CST's event coordinator. Woo! And Joe Capizzi, who is CST's program coordinator. They took care of everything, always with patience and grace, and I can't thank them enough. I'm indebted to Evelyn Laffey, who is the CST Senior Associate Director. So she had the vision for this symposium, and she had the persistence and the leadership throughout the whole planning and organization and making this whole thing happen. Thank you. I am deeply, deeply grateful to 4 additional people. So our CST Associate Directors, Catherine Rihamaki, who you've met. Atish Bhatia, who I hope you've met. And our 2 assistant directors, Sharon de la Cruz and Paul Durst. So they were all on the organizing committee. I'd like to also thank the other members of the symposium organizing committee for lots of time, lots of effort, and lots of really inspiring conversation. We actually did a lot of this exploring just in our meetings, and it was really phenomenal. So those people include Sigrid Adriansens, Jane Cox, Mark DeChiazza, Adam Finkelstein, Maria Garlock, A.M. Holmes, Jeff Snyder, Dan Trueman, Ainsley Vandenbroek, and Jeff Whetstone. So I want to say thank you to Constance Old for her design work, to the dancers, Cori and the other dancers and musicians last night, and Bora and Josh today, for our performing artists, to the showcase exhibitors yesterday, to all those who were involved in the interactive stations. Thank you. Thank you to Janet for an extraordinary, beautiful, and inspiring keynote this morning, to all of the moderators, all of the panelists. I mean, it was just incredible. Thank you all for sharing your questions, ideas, reflections. I want to say thank you to our co-hosts. So we're co-hosted by the Lewis Center for the Arts and Princeton School of Engineering and Applied Science. And finally, I'd like to thank all of you. I mean, it was really fantastic to have you here, to have you join in our conversations. I know we didn't get everybody involved in asking questions during these sessions, but I hope that you've been engaged outside and will continue. So we at the Council welcome future collaborations, and I want to invite you to connect with us after the symposium, whenever you feel like it, whenever you think of it. And you know, we're interested not only in engineering and the arts, but connecting, making connections with STEM and the arts, the humanities, and the social sciences. So think of us, and as you continue to ruminate on these interesting questions that were brought up today. But now I will invite you to reception. So we can celebrate, we can talk informally, and we can just enjoy this extraordinary day. I think it was quite remarkable. I have so much going on in my head. I imagine you do too. And thank you again.